Episode 13, Show Us Your Shoes, May 2nd, 2013, at 10:04 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Believe it or not, we are just around the corner from the 2024 presidential election. And there are so many important issues. How to deal with China, what to do about climate change, whether Miley Cyrus can really hold her own hand. How does that even work? But based on what we're hearing from Republican candidates and right-wing media, there's one issue that looms larger than all of that. It's the threat posed by a deadly virus, and probably not the one you're thinking of.
Wokeness is a virus more dangerous than any pandemic, hands down.
I think it's all because of the woke mind virus.
What if woke race obsession is not a fad, but instead an incurable brain virus that's infected our country's entire leadership class?
This woke mind virus.
The woke mind virus.
The woke mind virus.
It is a virus.
Yeah. Republicans are terrified of the woke mind virus. I mean, to be clear, not terrified enough to support public health care to treat it, but terrified.
Welcome to Something Came from Baltimore. My name is Tom Gouker, and you've made it this far. This is our last day talking together, and we just broke it into 2 episodes. And we are focusing on Laurie Greene's book, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, and we are starting to wind down that conversation. Music will be back. D-Light's World Click is the background music. Bobby Short has a great song at the end of the conversation, Real Live Girls. And we're going to get right into that conversation.
There's a fragrance that's here today, and they call it Charlie. A different fragrance that thinks your way, yeah, they call it Charlie. Kinda young, kinda now, Charlie. Kinda free, kinda wild. Kinda free, kinda wild. Kinda free, kinda wild. Charlie, kinda fragrance that's gonna stay, and it's here now. Charlie.
Charlie by Revlon, a most original fragrance.
I remember just sitting outside watching these guys come out of the store, and they were limping and they were walking really weird, and I thought that they were faking it. You know, like, these people just want attention. This was years ago, I thought this. And now I'm limping and walking weird, and I'm like, it's a big difference.
Oh, God, yeah.
So we normally start these conversations with a question about your sex life, and then we veer right off.
Got it now.
But we veer right off of it. But, you know, let's talk about the book, because it was funny. Like, I went through the book and I said, we basically talked about a lot of the main points without really even saying anything about the book. So in our conversation, we've talked about a lot of the things that are happening with Atlantic City and with the LGBTQ community and just things in general. It kind of all kind of wrapped up together. Since I know AC, and because I live there, and you're there right now, you almost have to break apart. Like, okay, so what's the relationship between Miss America and Atlantic City? Like, we'll kind of discuss like all the parts of this whole thing.
Yeah, well, they're are a lot of people who know a lot more about the specifics of that, but let's just
generalize
that important relationship, at least in the past, between Atlantic City and Miss America. So the Miss America pageant, arguably, maybe not the very oldest. There may have been a pageant the year before, but certainly the most long-lived and iconic beauty pageant in the world, right? It's the pageant that launched all pageants, right? All pageants now are modeled after the original Miss America pageant. And it started in Atlantic City. It started here as a way to, they called it the Fall Frolic, actually. It was a way to try to keep tourists here after Labor Day. And it was traditionally the weekend, the Sunday or after Labor Day when it was contested. But the Miss America pageant is a nonprofit organization. It runs mostly by virtue of volunteers. And those volunteers all came from Atlantic City and maybe Brigantine, like the surrounding towns. And families for generations would pass down these volunteer positions to their children and their grandchildren. And the men would, let's say, loan their Cadillacs for the parade on Saturday night that went down the boardwalk, the Miss America parade. The women might be chaperones for the contestants. There are all different kinds of jobs, volunteer jobs that really the Miss America pageant company support, needed for the pageant to run. And so this town not only felt connected to Miss America because it started here, they felt connected to Miss America because they felt it was theirs. They were part of making it run. Some of them even were, in the Miss America pageant, people from around here. A number of contestants were from this area, even if they contested out of other states, that they might have gone to college in. So there's that very, very strong connection that runs across racial and class lines and other, sort of divisions in the city where there's support for the Miss America pageant, although the most important jobs were often jobs that were passed down amongst the most important families in the area as well. So there's that very, very strong connection. When the Miss America pageant left for Las Vegas, it was really a betrayal to the people here in Atlantic City. And when they came back, they forgave them. But now that they've left for the Connecticut casinos, I don't know that, and they're pretty much sort of become much more silent than they used to be, enjoying much less success in terms of viewership. I don't know that this city is going to forgive them again if they wanted to come back, but they will tell you the reason they failed is because they abandoned Atlantic City, and Atlantic City is intrinsically a part of the pageant. So taking the pageant out of Atlantic City would never have worked. And, it's that kind of relationship. The Miss America event was one of the biggest events in the city every year for locals, not just for people that are visiting. The Miss America parade, right, became maybe one of the most beloved aspects of the Miss America pageant. And that's especially when it became the Show Us Your Shoes parade. When the parade was essentially, and the pageant was essentially queered, by the gay community in this city. A story which, people know, but hasn't officially been told, I don't believe, until my book. Although people in the city know the story. Gay people in the city know the story. People that are from the city that aren't part of the LGBTQ community, they don't necessarily know the story, and they're always surprised by it. So that's the relationship of the pageant to the city.
Okay, so as a child, I knew that the beauty pageant, Miss America pageant, was amazing. Like, it was a big deal. We sat around the TV and watched that every year. We rooted on our state, whoever that state was. And when I came out and I lived in Philly and I was younger, it was a big deal to go watch the parade and Show Us Your Shoes. It was interesting because it was segregated to a certain area on the boardwalk where yes, they would scream it. But yeah, when I got there, it was basically the whole thing. And everyone was doing it. Like, everyone figured it out that, okay, Show Us Your Shoes. Everyone was screaming. And it wasn't just a certain part of the boardwalk anymore. A pageant person didn't have shoes or didn't show them. they kind of got booed and stuff. And it was kind of, it was all in good spirit. And it was a lot of fun. It was campy. It felt like you were participating in the parade, like you were a part of something. Atlantic City is a little campy too.
I think people, first of all, underestimate how interesting this city is and what an interesting history Atlantic City has in so many ways, especially for the LGBTQ community. This city is so much more important than we give credit for. And right now, when I'm sort of looking into narratives of tourism, you can see that other cities just did a better job of narrating, of advertising, of telling a story about their city, that connected it to LGBTQ life, even though it was so potent here. For example, I think the narrative of San Francisco is like sort of like gay homeland, like it's as if we can always go back there. And that's where, everything is gay is San Francisco. This is a completely constructed narrative. It doesn't necessarily have to do with anything vested completely in reality and the truth of history, right? Although certainly San Francisco is a very gay friendly place, but they still created that narrative. I think Fire Island has its own narrative about sort of, gay male life and anything goes and debauchery, the sort of the summer hang. But Atlantic City has had a long history of LGBTQ life here. Probably over 100 years ago, there was sex tourism here, on the boardwalk, under the boardwalk. And people used to come here, sailors, or, infantry, other military, and take leave in Atlantic City. And they would come here for the sex tourism. And some of it was gay sex tourism. It's rumored, in my research, that the hanky code of sorts started on the Atlantic City boardwalk. And it wasn't just hankies that told the message of what your sexual propensities were and how available you were. It was things like socks, color socks you wore, or a color necktie you wore. There were all these different markers or indicators of your availability for sexual exploration, or or even for being a rent boy, and selling yourself. So that history is there. The Atlantic City boasts the first gay bar in the nation 2 years before Stonewall, Lyles, that basically fought the Liquor Control Board in New Jersey and got them to stop closing down bars just because there were gay people in them, because gay people were harassed. This is a story of Stonewall, and they won. And that was the first victory of its kind in the United States. So people, don't know that we've had a very long and storied history here with LGBTQ history, and that the area around New York Avenue, as you described, was hopping. And, this 4-block sort of square block area, boasted, I think, a more concentrated gay life than you have, had anywhere else in the country at the time, with clubs and rooming houses and hotels and cabarets and bars and restaurants and pools and resorts that were all gay, and not just that, but people lived there. People lived on New York Avenue. It was their home. It wasn't like an amusement park or a fantasy park, or as some scholars have called it, a fairway, like the sort of illegal surrounds of a carnival, where all the buskers were and where people went to slum it. It wasn't like that because people actually lived here. People might have gone, straight people might have gone there to experience, the other side or the wild side as they saw it. But that's not because it was a constructed artificial place, to find those things. It was a real place where people lived. And I can't emphasize that enough, because the research on New York Avenue up until now has said otherwise.
Yeah.
But it was a real place. And I know people that live there. I know about Sandy Beach. I know where he lived. I knew where Mortimer lived there. I knew where Tinsel Garland lived there. I knew where Treetop lived there. All these guys that performed in the clubs or just, wanted to live in the gayborhood, icons of the gayborhood, they all lived in that area.
For me in Philly, I came out early 90s, and it still was a repressive, or I felt repressed. I obviously, people forget that you didn't explain your gayness, and there was still coding where we still looked at each other, to see if you were, if there was any kind of signs. But then there was also, we're coming off of the Rizzo time period where it was okay to get beat up if you came out of a bar. And that happened often, and people got mugged. And the 13th Street area of Philly was dangerous and scary as opposed to what it is now. Atlantic City was a sanctuary. So it wasn't too far away that, we knew that when we get out of our car, we're gay as hell. And we're having a blast. And
straight people went to the gay bars, locals.
Yeah.
Everybody who was local went to those bars. It didn't matter that they were gay bars, and they were gay bars.
They were showing me things I never saw before, which is, we're dancing, we're having the best time, the music's pumping, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, clear, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, we're having a drag show. A drag show at 5 o'clock in the morning, you're all it's funny. It was just fun. And it felt decadent, but it felt free. And I think that is what was so attractive about Atlantic City is that, if you lived in New York, if you lived in, in New Jersey, in different areas, and if you lived in Philly, easily, there's a large population of gay people. They could go and be free. And that's where Atlantic City was always a really cool thing for me. I knew that if we were going there all drunk and bleary-eyed, we were going to have a blast.
Yeah, I mean, of course, John Schultz and Gary Hill, most importantly, John Schultz, was responsible for creating much of that in the sense that he owned most of the bars, hotels in the city.
Which they were nice. He did a really good job.
And they appealed to all different kinds of clientele in the LGBTQ community. The bars had a different flavor to them, and he even had some girls' bars as well. But the real attraction, and then also Harlow famously opened a club on New York Avenue for about 3 years after she closed her place in Philadelphia. So there's a huge amount of gay history there that people don't know about necessarily, because when the casinos came in, it was sort of erased. And so I want to make the point that what I do in my profession is I write what's called restorative history. And what restorative history does is it doesn't add history. There's nothing separate called LGBTQ history in my mind. It just restores the history that's there, that's been erased, and it's a very important thing to do. And again, the Show Us Your Shoes parade is maybe the most visible or the most obvious example, you might say, of this, because the parade was started. Now, the exact origins of the parade are up for debate. Who actually coined the term "Show Us Your Shoes" and yelled it, first is debated. But I'm going to use one of those stories, which was given to me by Robert Sandy Beach, which is that Treetop, one of the drag queens, who lived on the corner of New York Avenue on the boardwalk in one of the high rises, I think the Freilinger building, which used to be, they used to bookend where Ripley's Believe It or Not, Believe It or Not is now, there was a boarding house there, a hotel or a motel or whatever. And then on the other side as well. And Treetop lived in one of those, and they used to hang out the balcony every time there was a parade, the Miss America parade, and watch it go down the street or down the boardwalk. And they noticed one point that they weren't wearing any shoes because they were sitting in these convertibles with their evening gowns on, very proper, with their white gloves, doing the Miss America little twirly hand wave, the rotating hand wave. And so they started reading them, like they would read anybody. And they said, "Hey, show us your shoes," because they knew they didn't have them on. They were embarrassing them, making them understand that they weren't any better than anybody else, right? Bringing them back down to size, and which is what, drag queens do to each other. And then one day somebody lifted up their foot and that everybody started screaming, but before that, the Miss America organization had said, "Okay, you're going to go back down New York Avenue. and they're going to try to unnerve you, and they're going to yell at you and try to embarrass you, and you're not going to do anything. They basically forbade them to do anything that responded to that. And then one day somebody did, and that was the end of it. But they had like posters, they had watches, they had T-shirts, they had hats at one point, any possible thing of memorabilia that you could, or swag that you could think of, they had "show us your shoes" on it, right? Shortly after that, the Miss America pageant gave in to the pressure, right? You said it spread down the boardwalk. It was everywhere after about 5 years, right? Yeah. And they decided to rename the parade the the "Show Us Your Shoes" parade instead of the Miss America parade. And the girls dressed up in campy outfits that were comical and whimsical, as they say, representations of their states, right? And they paraded down the boardwalk holding up one foot in the air. So they've got these decorated shoes with like rhinestones. I mean, you can't define camp better than what this parade turned into.
It was a blast. It was a blast.
It's just like, it was camp. It personified. But they also erased the story. So the story, the new narrative they gave was, the most popular part of our pageants is parade. It's a family-friendly fun, sponsored by DSW Shoes. And, someone once yelled out, someone once, it was never anything about what actually happened. And so, it became really important to me to get that story out and make it right, correct history. And last year we were able to put a bronze plaque up on New York Avenue commemorating that, the origins of the parade in the neighborhood. And the fact that there's a drag queen on that plaque. And I think that kind of thing is extremely important. That kind of visibility and correction of history, is extremely important in terms of advocacy and activism as we move forward. You can't start being an activist unless you first correct the information that's out there, and show people that we have been here and we've had a major impact on the city. And not only that, but there's other ways that the gay community in Atlantic City queered the Miss America pageant. All the gay bars were on New York Avenue, and even though the contestants changed every year, the people that worked behind the scenes didn't. So you've got the hairdressers and the costumers and the makeup artists and the choreographers and the singing coaches and the yada, yada, yada. And these people were almost all gay. And they came back every year. So they would frequent, the bars and clubs on New York Avenue, and they knew everybody. It was like a second home to them. They'd be there for a month, working on Miss America. And so it's, that connection was there as well. And if you ask, although Miss America was beloved by Atlantic City, it's more beloved by the gay community in Atlantic City than anything else. And uncovering why was very interesting. The gay community on New York Avenue, especially the drag queens, they saw these contestants as kindred spirits. They were just women performing gender to get a prize. It wasn't real. And that's why they could win talent by playing, red solo cups, as their talent for music. I mean, that is the campiest thing ever, right? And so they just saw what they do as camp performance, and they admired them for it. They'd say things like, well, you try walking around in heels and a bikini. That's really hard. Like that's got, that takes real poise, and they really felt, now I don't know that the contestants felt the same campiness about themselves, right? Probably not, but they felt that way. And so when Miss America 2.0 came and eliminated, like Gretchen Carlson took over, right? And eliminated all the camp to try to insist that this wasn't a pageant, that's a scholarship competition, even though girls are up there in bikinis, they took away the swimsuits. They made the evening gown optional. You can now wear whatever you want. So the two, what we would say would be objectifying aspects of the pageant. And then they highlighted the things that highlighted them as subjects, as people. Like they talk about now their campaign, their project, 5 times during the pageant. Their talent is highlighted. So the things that made them people, the question and answer part is very important, where they get asked these ridiculous political questions and they have to try to answer them without having an opinion to make anybody angry. It's a great skill that the queens also recognize. I've got to answer a charged political question and make it seem like I'm not taking sides, because that's not what women do, right? Women don't have strong opinions. As I said, that's very divisive, they camp this pageant in so many ways. And in some ways, the LGBT community, needed to see the pageant as camp. And so they did. And when they eliminated these things, they just thought, they just think they're better than everybody else. They think they're bigger than they are. They gave the same critiques they would give to a queen who got, too full of herself.
When I think
they don't
of
think like us anymore, because they think they're just like us, and now they think they're better than us.
When I look at the 2.0 version, I mean, there's other wheels in motion at the same time, because it's after the first AIDS shock, where AIDS was out there, and before we even talk about like the 2.0 era, let's talk about what Miss America was and drag shows were before then, and then the discussion will talk about. Okay, things changed, and then this is where we're at now. That kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, do you mean Miss America or Miss America?
Yeah, Miss. Okay. Like
Yeah.
If anyone's listening to this and say they're in Omaha, they have no idea about what drag was like in Atlantic City or what Miss America is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about that, and then we will break into like where are we now and what happened, because 2.0 is a good way to start about all the gay community, and talk about the Miss America and Miss America. And
yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, there was a thriving drag performance scene in Atlantic City. From the 1970s, you could argue on. I mean, thriving. There was drag before that, probably as early as the 1950s. But it was also a very local and a very campy drag. These were local performers. They were doing local humor. Everybody knew them, right? The people being picked on were other local people. They made their clothes out of stuff they got in thrift stores. It isn't like drag is today post RuPaul, right? The post RuPaul era of drag, where people spend lots of money on their outfits. They have to look real or serve up something real or very elaborate. This was more just like, I took a bunch of, for example, a story I was told was, that one of the queens took a bunch of stuffed animals and took out the stuffing and made hips out of them because she forgot her hips one day, or, made a dress out of 45 or, Capri Sun pouches. This was not, fancy, and again, the humor was very local. If you weren't from here or from the area, you might not get some of the jokes. Very campy, very dirty, very meant to offend, no holds barred sort of a drag scene. The Miss America pageant arose out of a need to do something about the AIDS crisis when it hit Atlantic City, which was about 10 years after it hit Philadelphia. So we're talking the early 90s, really the mid 90s, when it started to really decimate Atlantic City. And in fact, the AIDS epidemic had more impact on Atlantic City than any other city in New Jersey. It was one of the largest demographic events in the history of New Jersey, the kinds of death rates that we had in Atlantic City per capita. So it was big, and people wanted to do something in the gay community. And so they thought, hey, let's have these drag shows and see if we can help the people in our community who are struggling with surviving with AIDS, or the people that need help with expenses for funerals, and we want to find a cure, all those things. And so it was actually, I believe, Don Guardian and John Schultz that put up the money at first. And Don Guardian was the first president to start the South Jersey Against AIDS, which is now the South Jersey AIDS Alliance, the SJAA, same acronym, different name, which was one of the very first AIDS organizations in the country as well. Again, another important historic marker for Atlantic City and LGBTQ history. I think it was the second organization in the United States. and maybe in the world. Not certain about that. But they put up the money, and then they were going to use these fundraisers to keep funding research and help for people with AIDS. So these pageants it was an homage up to the Miss America pageant, I'd say, rather than a spoof. And it was structured in the same way as the pageant. It had all 4 categories: swimsuit, evening gown, talent, question, and answer, and them talking about what their particular mission was for the year that they served. But it was all local queens competing. Sandy Beach produced them and directed them. And he would have skits that were interspersed between the competitions. In particular, the opening number would lay out the theme for the competition. And they were usually based on pop culture. Like when the movie Titanic came out, and they always told, by the way, why, it was called Miss America because the queens were going to compete in Miss America, but for some reason beyond their control, they missed it. And that's called Miss America. So, for example, the year that the movie Titanic came out, they did the pageant's theme was Titanic. And the idea was they were going to be in the pageant, but they were on the Titanic and it sank, and so there was always really funny, very campy, often dirty, always offensive, little skits that ran around that theme. And in the beginning, all the girls that won were local girls, and everybody knew everybody. And that's what the humor was like. Just to tell you how tied together the Miss and Miss America pageant were, when the Miss America pageant left for Las Vegas, they stopped having the Miss America pageant for almost 10 years. And then when the GLBT Alliance, the nonprofit, the 501c4 was started, they used the pageant as their signature event, and they revived it, and they brought it to Boardwalk Hall, where Miss America was traditionally contested. So now they're contesting it outside of the bar. I should have said it was done at Studio 6 on their deck, which was a bar on Snake Alley in New York Avenue, and owned by Gary Schultz. And it was, it was always sold out. Always. Everybody came. The whole community came. And then they moved it to Boardwalk Hall, and it became a more professional event. They got Carson Kressley, the celebrity, to host it, and everything changed. So this was sort of like Miss America 2.0. But then later it kept growing. It then went to House of Blues, I believe. Went to Harrah's for a while. In the Borgata, and eventually it's landed now in the Edis Arena in the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. So it's just grown. And I would say, though, that its last permutation, since it's moved into the bigger casinos like the Hard Rock and then also the Borgata, I think we're really talking about a Miss America 3.0 now, which has finally changed to allow transgender individuals to compete. Before there was a rule you couldn't have surgery or hormones, right? So they finally changed that. It took some pushing, but it's also a national pageant now. And the queens are from all over. They're not local queens. Mm-hmm. And to many people, that made the pageant something they didn't want to support anymore. It wasn't as interesting to them. They didn't love it anymore because it wasn't about Atlantic City. And it is no longer tied to Miss America, which is now gone again, right, to Connecticut. It's still going on here, even though Miss America is gone. So it's been an interesting evolution for both pageants that's somewhat coincident with one another, somewhat followed the same route.
Going back into Miss America, from my experiences, it wasn't every week or every month. There was always a fundraiser for HIV awareness at the time. It was what we did. Like that's where it was always linked together. So if there was an event and it was in any gay establishment, even if it was a normal drag show, they would bring out a hat and just have you say, okay, this isn't important for anyone but for age research and stuff. So I remember Miss America as the coolest most campiest, most craziest thing, and I could never get in because I couldn't get in. I could get on the boardwalk, but it was always sold out. People talked about it for months. It was a total event. And then the 2.0 and 2.3 version, it's really not really for the gay community anymore. It's more performative, very similar to what RuPaul is. So I believe
I agree. I would agree with you. I mean, others might not. I would agree. And also, whereas the girls all used to know each other, the performers, and support each other, and it was a real, what we call in anthropology a community of practice, where they evolved together. They taught each other how to they learned their craft from each other, right? They had their own language with each other. None of that's true anymore. Now it's like a cutthroat, there's drama all the time. There's complaints about the judging, it's just like you would see, as you said, on RuPaul, it's the same sort of drama going on. And it's not local, national audience.
I always ask people, I'm like, did you have a good time? And they said, yeah, this is a blast. They think it's as a show, like an entertainment vehicle. People are walking away entertained with the new version. The link, I think, is the fact that we were all in it together for AIDS research or for AIDS patients, and Miss America was a vehicle to entertain, but also to generate some funds. And now the 2.0 and 3, people are now living with HIV, and it's definitely not in the forefront. Like we almost, as a gay community, we don't talk about HIV. In fact, I had a friend call me up and ask what gonorrhea was. So I'm still teaching people, like, okay, sex has consequences, but it's that link, that emotional connection was the fact that we're here together, we're having fun, but we also are here for our friends and family who are suffering with HIV. Now the new one, because a lot of the AIDS fun are so removed from the day-to-day of a gay community, it almost feels like it's just a show.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that it is disconnected from its original, at least, image of being a charity event. There'd be people that don't like John and Gary or what they did in the city and say it was never a charity event. They were always just using it as a way to skim money or whatever. But, regardless of that, yes, I can't agree more that the emotional content that used to power the narrative of the city and the purpose is gone. Right. Yeah. And that would be everyone coming together around the issue of HIV. And it wasn't just about curing it. It was about doing something, about supporting each other while we were doing something. And when you feel helpless, that's a big deal. And I think that was originally why the pageant was so powerful. It was a way to object to what was going on, but in a way that made people feel better. It helped people cope with the stresses of the situation. And at the same time, it allowed people to express their identity proudly. And I think it did that.
We're at
looking at the time, Tom.
Oh, you can see it too? All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's do another one.
Okay.
Live at the Carlisle. It's real live girl.
Pardon me, miss, but I've never done this with a real live girl. Straight off the farm with an actual arm full of real live girl. Pardon me if your affectionate squeeze fogs up my goggles and buckles my knees. I'm simply drowned in the sight and the sound and the scent and the feel of a real live girl. I've seen photographs and facsimiles that have set my heart up in a whirl. But no work of art gets you right in the heart like a real live girl. Nothing can beat being swept off your feet by a real live girl. Girls were like fellas was once my belief. What a reversal and what a relief. I'll take the flowering hat and the towering heel and the squeal of a real live girl. Yeah! I've never done this with a real live girl. Straight off the farm with an actual arm full of real live girl. Pardon me if your affectionate squeeze fogs up my goggles and buckles my knees. I'm simply drowned in the sight and the sound and the scent and the feel of a real live
Episode 13 is complete, and we have one more to go. And believe it or not, episode 14 is called Bobby Short. So stay with us. End of episode.